Hello, and welcome to Raising the Bar with the MBBA. I'm your co-host, Adiola Adejobi.
And I'm Jason Clark, president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, the Metropolitan Black Bar Association is the largest association of predominantly African-American attorneys in New York. Our goal is to advance equality in the pursuit of justice, assist in the professional development of our members, and address legal issues affecting New Yorkers.
The goal of Raising the Bar with MBBA is to foster a substantive conversation about justice issues in our community and try to identify a couple of solutions in the process.
Today, we're going to take a look at mental health and wellness in the Black community. Joining us today are attorney David Mitchell and Dr. Manny St. Victor. So, welcome you guys. And this is such an important issue, an important topic to talk about, frankly, because of the idea that it just isn't talked about in many communities of color. And I know, Adiola, did you want to jump into a couple things?
Of course. First things first, can you tell us more about your connection to mental health?
I like to think of my journey as mental health as an experience, mental health and sometimes mental illness is an experience, as well as mental health treating people. I feel like I did all the things right growing up, perfect GPA, valedictorian, all the awards, went to Harvard, went to medical school, actually had a parallel career in software engineering, launched a couple companies, bought this beautiful house, wife, kids, and I was so miserable. And it's hard to explain to people because when you say that, you're like, you're an ingrate. You're not grateful for all the things you have. I'm like, I am grateful, but I just don't feel connected to it. Each new win brings me more pain. As I started digging more into just what it was going to take to eventually feel good, I realized that it wasn't intuitive and it wasn't necessarily guaranteed. So one of the things that I became increasingly passionate about was helping others who have done the right things and who have all the checkbox stuff and therefore don't get to speak about how they're feeling, have a voice and communicate. I studied psychiatry. I actually left my psychiatry residency 3 days into the third year to join a virtual world, a software startup making virtual worlds for kids. Basically because play is the solution, and I'll talk more about that later, but there's a trust and growth that happens in play that doesn't happen elsewhere, and no one wants to hear that.
David?
And so I'm an attorney, as you mentioned. I am a senior associate at Hogan Lovells. My kind of journey and connection to mental health and wellness began when I was a junior associate transitioning to a mid-level associate. And I had done the right things, kind of exactly what Dr. Manny's talking about. But I started having this self-doubt and started having these mental health struggles to where at times I would get this debilitating anxiety. We'll talk a little bit more later about imposter syndrome, which is something that I had no idea what that was about. I just knew I was struggling. And so I started to eventually speak to friends of mine, speak to mentors of mine, and get some professional help to learn what was really going on with me. And then I realized through those conversations how frequent or how prevalent some of these issues are, especially within our community. And knowing that talking to other people really helped me kind of overcome some of the issues I was having, I've decided, I feel it's something I have to do, to speak more about it, to let people know that they're not kind of suffering alone and that there are ways that they can overcome whatever issues they're having.
So, David, it was interesting hearing what you and Dr. St. Victor were talking about, and one of the things I was hearing really had to do with this idea of knowing that there was an issue but not saying something about it. And that makes me think of just so often, it seems like there's this stigma, especially in community of colors and African-American communities in particular, when it deals with issues of mental health. Can you talk a little bit about where that stigma and just a little bit more about it and what we do with that information?
Sure. So I've been, like I mentioned, speaking out about this more often and have been a part of these discussions, so I've learned a bit. Obviously, Dr. St. Victor is the expert, but it really is something where just we don't have these conversations. It's something where you kind of tough it out. You've got to be strong and just power through. We're so used to doing that. We're resilient as people of color, as black people, and it's just something that we're so used to putting our head down and powering through. But as far as where that kind of comes from and how that came to be, I think Dr. St. Victor can speak more to that.
So my belief, or what I've seen, is there is a history of distrust in our community, and rightfully so, going as far back as Tuskegee, between us and the medical architecture. That's how I think of it. And even really a distrust sometimes of the media, and the importance to have our own story, because representation matters. And if you think back even to my childhood, it wasn't so often you would see a black person who wasn't automatically stigmatized in the media and just for falling for whatever narrative. So I think a large part of the upbringing is be strong, don't fall into the system. The system can be getting a mental health diagnosis that eliminates you from the game because you were weak, and the weak don't survive in the jungle, or going to jail. Either way, you got to tough it out, but find that middle line. Please go to college, do the things you need to do. Don't do anything to get labeled and disqualified. That leads to a lot of suffering because ultimately there's no place to discuss being authentic and being true. And we're in a culture that even outside of the black culture, it's stigmatized, where you have the majority, like, nothing's wrong with me, pushing extra hard to do okay. But meanwhile, as we were taught, we're pushing extra hard to do twice as okay, so as to look okay. Because we live by assumption. We're a culture that lives by assumption. So someone's going to look at you, they're going to make a set of assumptions about you, and you can't comfortably coast, on the assumption that you're an upstanding, good, safe citizen. You got to put in the effort, and that chronic effort is chronic stress to just look normal, to look assimilated. And then you got to say to yourself, what can I do to stand out without being kicked out of the tribe?
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, with what you said in mind, what are some of the main issues that you see impacting the black community around mental health?
I like to reduce it to one thing: an external locus of control and an external locus of value. You can put all the labels you want on a person: bipolar, depressed, anxious. This is an architecture of a story that has been told for a majority. But ultimately, when you're looking at the black community, we're essentially brought up to believe that there's something better, but that something better requires stepping outside of yourself to become more like the better. And it requires the permission of a gatekeeper who may not necessarily understand your way of being. So all the other diseases, the conditions, when you really look at what they are, anxiety is a chronic fear. A fear of what? What is the deepest human fear? Being kicked out of your tribe and starving to death. Depression. Depression is mainly about a constant feeling of guilt, shame, learned helplessness, which means you do the thing that you're seeing everyone else do, yet you're not getting the results, and you're asking, why me? And plus, in addition to that, a lot of culture runs on trust. So if I can't come to you, if I'm sitting across from you and I'm telling you my problems and you cannot hear my problems, all you can see is my pathology, or the projection of the pathology you were taught is automatically in me, then I'm automatically ill.
Because even when you just think of like the story, especially, at least speaking myself as an African American, all of us as African Americans, this idea that, going through history, there's so much we've always had to overcome. You've had these generations had to deal with slavery, they had to deal with segregation and discrimination. And then there's almost like this implicit idea is like, well, if you can't just, handle yourself, like so many folks had to deal with more, like there's something less about you. And just figuring out a way to recognize like, no, that's not the case. And there are probably a lot of folks, I'm sure there were a lot of folks who had those issues back in the day, but it just wasn't able to be as treated, or there weren't as many ways to be able to diagnose it and find solutions to it. And now that we do, it's certainly something we should take advantage of. But that also brings me to something that you said for a quick second earlier, David, which had to do with imposter syndrome.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about what that is.
Sure. So the imposter syndrome is you've kind of made it to a place in your life where things are actually seemingly going well. And but you can't really accept it, right? You've gotten to this space. For me, the example is I got to a law firm, and as I was starting to get more responsibility, as I was starting to, like I said, transition from this junior to mid-level of seniority, I started to think, oh, it's only going to be a matter of time before they realize I'm not good enough.
They made a mistake somewhere.
Right. They screwed up. They let me sneak in here. Right. And Dr. St. Victor has actually shared there's this concept of you see all of these, you get all these positive feedback, you get all these positive comments from people, but you get the one negative, and that's what you latch on to.
Right.
Because it's, oh, okay, that confirms what I thought. They realize that, I screwed up. It's only going to be a matter of time before I'm not going to be able to be here because I'm not good enough. And it's really you internalizing this self-doubt, and it can come from a lot of different places. But for me, it was something that at times it became the self-fulfilling prophecy, to where I would say, okay, well, I'm not going to make it, and then I would shudder up and not be able to do anything, to where, all right, well, if you can't do the work, that is a problem, right?
Okay,
so it's this cycle, and I had to break out of it because it started to get to the point where, it was really going to impact my work and my abilities to succeed. And I did, like I said, reach out to some friends, some mentors, and then getting professional help that was provided at the firm, actually, really kind of took things to the next level for me. And finding out that so many of us are going through, maybe not imposter syndrome, but something to where you're struggling with mental health, that helped me realize we just got to talk about this more. Quickly, there are a couple of subgroups of the imposter syndrome. There's the perfectionist, which is the work twice as hard to be half as good. There's the Superman, the natural genius, the soloist, and the expert. So we don't have time to get into exactly what those are, but if folks are interested in learning more, there's a lot of research about this and how it impacts the Black community and communities of color at higher rates.
Yeah, and I actually want to take it back a step in terms of what you were saying earlier about trust. Can you talk a little bit about how people can establish trust, one, and then two, when families encounter situations when they feel like maybe a family member has been misdiagnosed? What are some of the things that they can do around that?
Okay. To establish trust, I need to know that you hear my story. And in order for me to believe you hear my story, I need to hear my story back from you without judgment. I need to hear it not reframed. I need to hear it without any connotations, and I need to hear it without tension, as if you're feeling nauseous telling me my truth. And I need to hear it not intellectualized as well. I don't need to hear that every word that comes out of my mouth, you're looking down like, check. I'm like, oh, I'm 7 in. I'm all in the DSM-5 now. I need to know that it's a person hearing me as a person and thinking back to things they've been through in their lives. And they're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of my childhood. You had a childhood too, ironic, And you were talking about misdiagnosis. That's challenging because the way that I remember stuff working is confirmation bias. Once I've looked down on a paper, I've seen, say, 15 patients today, and you're patient number 16, and I look down and I see what you've had before, then it becomes a matter of, do I want to fight the architecture that has been propagating this? So it becomes, how confident am I about myself? Now, one thing that I want to bring up, and this is a little bit controversial, is that, especially speaking as a physician, is that there are multiple pathways to well-being. So if you keep running into diagnoses from someone who is trained in diagnosis, sometimes if you're in pain and these things are not working, you want to look to other resources. You want to look to a narrative situation. You want to look to, and I moved from psychiatry to hypnotherapy, which is more precise and has hypnotherapy, hypnosis.
Okay.
It's basically what they found is that a lot of therapy without the trust, you're unable to get to a person's unconscious resistance, the part of them that is fighting them, causing the internal conflict that they can't break through. And the main thing about hypnosis is helping a person see the multiple parts of them that are going on and letting them know there are two parts in here and they're fighting each other. This part you learned, you identified with because this is what your culture or your family told you was good, your church or whatever, and this part is the authentic you. So let's get this part working with this part. And that part right there, that way of thinking alone is entirely different from a lot of the medical way of thinking often. Because, like I said, the medical way of thinking, you come in with your diagnosis, I'm more CYA than anything, you know, or CMYA than anything, because ultimately, you're a stranger. I have about 20 minutes with you. How bad do I want to play with my license today? You know?
It takes time to develop that trust with people, like you said.
Right.
Because you walk out with me, when I was doing psych inpatient, if I've done a 24-hour shift and I was in Miami, and I don't know if you guys remember about the person who ate the other person's face off in Miami that time. Yeah.
Jeez. Was that Dexter? No, I'm joking.
No, but this is Miami where, you know, it's wild. So after I did a 24-hour shift, I go home, I would go to sleep from sleep deprivation. I wake up, I check the news to see if nothing that I signed to discharge, you know, nothing that I signed to discharge a person led to something cataclysmic melting down half of Miami. You know, so the trust and empathy that a person needs to build in a relationship, that's hard to achieve in these dynamics.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about trust and empathy, you know, like a very close family member of mine has been dealing with some of these issues. And one of the things that she had mentioned is that, you know, as soon as she was able to kind of accept, you know, that it's nothing certain like wrong with her, like, you know, at her core, but something that, you know, just has to be, you know, that the more you talk, you know, the more you open yourself up to folks, you know, that people may have solutions or ways that they can be able to help you. You know, it's just made so many, you know, inroads for her as in her development. And that actually makes me think about, you know, we're talking about, you know, I think we've diagnosed in a lot of ways, like what some of the issues are, but like what are some of the healthy ways to be able to deal with this?
Well, I think one thing is, in your example, right, accepting that it's not something that's at your core necessarily a problem with you. We should all be thinking about mental health in the same way we think about our physical health, right? If somebody has, you know, an injury to their arm, they want to get their arm fixed, right? They want to go and do what they can to heal that arm. Right. And so there's a shame that we feel when there's something that's going on with our mental health, and we avoid getting it fixed or getting the help we need. And so, you know, just starting there by trying to figure out, you know, I should be taking care of myself. That's one step, and seeking, you know, I can speak from my experience, seeking advice from your friends if you're not ready to go the professional help route. Starting there, speaking out your truth, not just to yourself, speaking to other people. That's a tough step to get over. So once you're able to do that, then you can really start to see all the resources that are available to you.
And I like to think of your unconscious mind, which is the majority of your mind. Anything that's not in your attention is your unconscious mind. Yeah, like conversations we had 2 questions ago, unconscious mind. So your unconscious mind goes to work hardcore on whatever sentence or whatever question you give it. And a culture that is conditioned to think, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? You will find something wrong with me. Yeah, you will. And then you'll find something wrong with other people because we project, you know, we walk around all day projecting what we're thinking about ourselves. We assume that everyone else is similar to us that's around us. So shifting the question to something like, what can I do from here? Where do I truly want to be? Why am I choosing these people to be around me? How much of my thoughts do I believe? And what kind of results am I getting from the thoughts of mine that come up that I choose to believe? Different questions, and then really listening honestly to your answer. You know, journaling is really good because you journal and then a week later you read it without activating your inner critic, and you'll be like, oh, me? I wrote that? I know it's in my handwriting, but did I write that? And patterns emerge. You know, I actually started doing a combination of journaling on social media, like not super intimate stuff, but then journaling on Google Docs. And the benefit is social media will tell you every year, it'll be like the last 6 years. And you can look and you'll see patterns. You'll be like, hey, I've been, you know, fighting this fear for a while. It's not about something wrong with me. It's this specific fear that comes up around summer, around Christmas, around when I visit this person. Yeah. And you get those insights by being honest to yourself across the board. And anyone who doesn't like it, they ultimately don't need to be around you anyway.
Yeah. And so what about if someone realized, hey, they understand that they have an issue and they went to therapy and they kind of thought that maybe it wasn't for them?
It's a relationship. The trust we were talking about earlier, you've got to develop that with the person who's going to become your therapist. So if you went to therapy one time and you finally broke down and said, all right, everybody's telling me to do this, and you went to therapy one time and you just really didn't connect with the person, or you didn't feel like you got anything out of it, that doesn't mean that therapy is not for you. It means maybe that therapist isn't for you, or that mental health professional is not for you. So it takes time to figure out, what kind of relationship is going to work with you. The same way a real relationship, people have been in more than one relationship generally, right? You've got to find the right fit, and that takes time and it takes trust.
Yeah. And again, there are different modalities. If someone who's taken on the moniker therapist doesn't work for you, how about someone who's taken on the moniker coach? You take on a coach, because often we say you can go from healing or thriving. And with the thriving, it's okay. I've disidentified with this mental illness. It was something in my past, a certain way of being. Now I'm here. I can sit with someone who continues to hear me talk about my problems, or even I can sit with someone who continues to CBT me or give me these meds, or I can go about the process of individuation and finding the authentic me, which is where you're going to feel good.
That's interesting. So when we're talking about a therapist versus a coach, it seems like a therapist is someone who may be able to help with diagnosing, what your challenges are. But then the coach is someone who may proactively tell you this is what you should do, or these are some things that you may want to consider doing that can help you overcome them. Is that true?
Well, the way I think about it, I brand under coaching. I do hypnotherapy, but it's coaching. I need you to get up off your tail and figure out what you want to do with your life. Okay. You'll come through. I'll give you a few minutes to talk about how you're feeling, and I'll tell you. The difference between someone who is thriving and someone who is healing is the person who is. Someone can thrive and heal, and the healing can happen in the thriving. You get clear on what you want, and everything that comes up between you getting it, those are the things we work on. But you have to be honest with some people, and I've been one of those some people. I've done probably about 6 years of my life in paralyzing major depression, where I've lost businesses, family breakups and stuff. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, am I in a position where, with me, I can't get out of this bed? I can't hold a thought without a negative, toxic thought or 7 flooding it, I can't be in a conversation with someone where I actually hear them without hearing my inner critic beating me to sleep. If that's where you are, then that is the task. So you have to ask yourself where you are in the process. And in some cases, if you're super thriving, it might be that you need a business coach, because your business is a projection of who you are. So if your business is messing up, your business coach will sit with you and be like, hey, you need to get out of your ego, because this is not your customer base. This is you making decisions based off of wanting your business to look egomaniacal. They won't say it that way, but ultimately, you have to find the person who, when you're interacting with them, you feel yourself changing.
And as we talked about stigma and things like that in our community, a lot of times, that leads to people self-medicating. So can you talk a little bit about that, one, and then in addition, now as people are, applying for jobs and things like that, having a mental illness is classified as a disease. And can you talk about some of the protections with that as well?
Self-medication is a dead end, because you're trying to fix the car while you're swerving down the road. No point of reference. It's a get help type of situation. If you are struggling, and the earlier we were talking about this, the earlier you get off a bus headed in the wrong direction, the shorter the walk back. And your goal is to get back to high functioning. So get help. Be honest with yourself. If you say I'm going to quit when I can't, and when I want to now, and try to quit. If you can't, get help.
Yeah, and then as far as protections, so mental health issues like depression, they are protected under state, city, and federal laws under your employment status. If you need to go and take the time to get help, you're protected to do so. You can't be discriminated against because of some disabling issue that you have related to your mental health, the same way that you can't be discriminated against for a disability you have relating to your physical health. So something that we just want to make sure that everybody knows is, please go get the help. Don't use excuses like self-medication or it impacting your job. Go get the help that you need.
Okay, so in these last 5 minutes, there's two things I think we probably want to at least follow up on. One is, let's say I'm someone and I believe that there's someone close to me that is dealing with mental health and wellness issues, and how can I help that person? So that's one thing I think we want to talk about. And I know, at least before we wrap up, because we already have only a couple minutes left, we want to make sure that we kind of circle back to that issue as to that stigma and what we can do, like as a community, to overcome that stigma.
The first question about you have a person close to you or a loved one who's going through something, I think it's important to listen to them when they're speaking to you, hear their truth. And one thing I think I want people to know is it's not just the people who are outwardly showing that they're struggling. It's oftentimes the strong friend or the strong family member who seems like they're taking care of everybody else or they've got everything going right, and you never hear them kind of struggling with anything. It's oftentimes because no one asks. And so I encourage people to check on their strong friends.
I say you heal yourself and you will heal your whole lineage. So when you heal you, the people that raised you, if they have some guilt that's keeping them from moving forward in life, they'd be like, oh, no longer, what did I do wrong? You heal them, and you heal your family moving downwards. So it's to put your oxygen mask on first, and really everything that you think is outside of your head, you're imagining and giving attention to. You stop giving attention to the stigma loses its power. You love yourself and you love the people that you've let into your inner circle deeply without a story that's being imposed on you. The stigma no longer exists where it matters.
Yeah. And just finally, we should talk more about it. We should continue to talk about these challenges that not just our community faces, but everyone faces these problems, and it's a normal thing to go through. We need to normalize this through a dialogue.
And are there any resources that people should know about? Let's say, obviously you're certainly hearing about coaches, hearing about therapists. Let's say I'm watching this episode now, and are there any free resources that someone at least could look at to get started? Or
look into meditation. Specifically, give more attention to your breathing. Start Googling, honestly, guided meditations around breathing and healing. Make sure that the ones you're using are reputable, and play. Return to play, return to curiosity, returning to do things that are daring in an open way with people you trust enough to give you feedback, so you can see who you are when you're not following the role, when you're not doing everything for a grade or for an accolade. Yeah. Those resources are available online, and each person's resource is private. Yeah. So dig deep inside and then Google.
That's amazing.
Sounds good.
And that's all the time we have today. But we want to thank you for watching Raising the Bar with the MBBA on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
All right. See you next time.